Some love stories don't begin with fireworks. They begin with silence, with duty, with doors that close quietly behind you. But somewhere inside them, something unforgettable stirs. If you're someone who believes in slow-burning love and second chances, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what's about to unfold. I don't remember much of the ceremony, only the echo of my heels across the marble aisle and the way my veil trembled, even though there was no wind inside the chapel. There were candles, hundreds of them, casting flickers of light against cold stone. I should have felt warm beneath their glow. But I didn't. It was the kind of light that only revealed shadows. Ethan didn't hold my hand. He stood beside me in a suit as pristine and impersonal as the vows we were about to exchange. His expression was unreadable. Not cruel, not kind, just distant, like a man reading a script he didn't write. My name sounded foreign when the officiant said it aloud. Anna Layton, do you take this man? I nodded. I didn't say I do. I simply nodded. And that was enough. Papers had been signed. Arrangements made. My mother's hospital bills would be covered. Benji could stay in school. Our little shop would remain ours, for now. In exchange, I would become Mrs. Radcliffe, a name heavier than any dress I'd ever sewn. The guests, if you could call them that, were mostly men in tailored suits, women with icy stares and lips, the color of old wine. No one clapped, no one cried. This wasn't a wedding, it was a transaction. Later in the car, I glanced at Ethan. He didn't look at me. His jaw was sharp, still, and clenched like someone holding back the need to speak, or the need to feel nothing at all. Maybe both. We arrived at the Radcliffe estate under a slate-gray sky. The house was grand, of course. Grand the way museums are, meant to be admired, not inhabited. Ivy crawled along its stone walls like old secrets trying to resurface. Inside, the scent of sandalwood met me like a memory I couldn't place. Your room is upstairs, Ethan said without turning around. First door on the left. Not our room. Your room. I nodded again. He walked away without another word, his footsteps fading down a corridor I hadn't seen before. I stood in the grand foyer, beneath a chandelier older than me, wearing a wedding dress that didn't feel like mine. And for a moment, I wanted to go home. Not the apartment above the shop. No. I wanted to go back to the kitchen with chipped tile, floors, and the scent of cinnamon and ginger from my mother's tea. I wanted to be 16 again, sitting at the table while she hummed an old lullaby, her hand steady as she sewed a button onto Benji's coat. You always start from the inside, Anna, she'd say, thumbing the thread through the fabric. Fix what's hidden first. That's how you make something last. I had no idea how to fix this. In my room, not his. Everything looked too perfect. Cream drapes, walnut furniture, a 4-poster bed I didn't dare sit on right away. I opened the vanity drawer without thinking. It was old, beautifully carved, and smelled faintly of lavender and age. Inside, there was a photograph, framed, slightly dust-covered, of a young boy in a garden. A little boy with tousled dark hair and a solemn face. I knew that face. Ethan. Maybe 8 or 9 years old. But it wasn't the photo that stopped me. It was what had been tucked behind the frame. A folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. My hands moved before I had time to think. I unfolded it carefully. It was in my mother's handwriting. To the man I once trusted. You promised you'd protect him, and I believed you. But men, like you protect names, not people. My husband gave 15 years to your house. He was loyal, quiet, faithful, until the day you asked him to look away. He didn't. You threw him out instead. No pension, no dignity, just silence. Our daughter doesn't know. I won't tell her. Not yet. She deserves to believe there is still kindness in this world, even if it means keeping the truth from her a little longer. But one day, if she ever walks those halls again, if she ever sees your family the way I once did, I hope she remembers that her father left not because he was weak, but because he was decent. M. I sat on the edge of the bed, paper trembling, in my hands. My father hadn't just disappeared. He'd been erased. The Radcliffes hadn't simply hired my mother to clean their windows and polish their silver. They'd made her a silent witness to something we weren't supposed to understand. And now I had married into them. A door creaked faintly down the hall. I folded the letter back into its hiding place, just as I had found it. I didn't know why I did that. Some instinct, some sense of timing. But I knew this. I was not just a bride. I was walking into the center of a family that had once broken mine. Ethan's footsteps passed my door, steady, unhurried. He had no idea what I'd found, or maybe he did. The silk sheets felt too smooth beneath my fingertips. They whispered against my skin like something borrowed, something I wasn't meant to keep. I hadn't moved since I sat down. The room was silent, save for the ticking of the old clock. On the wall, its hands stubborn, as if time itself refused to move forward in this house. Cream-colored drapes swayed slightly in the breeze from a vent I couldn't locate. The scent of sandalwood lingered in the air, stronger here than in the hall, mixing now with something floral, maybe lily, maybe too expensive for me to recognize. There was a knock on the door. Soft. 2 taps. "Dinner is served in the dining room," came a voice I didn't know. Polite. Neutral. I didn't answer. I waited until the footsteps faded, then rose slowly, removing the earrings I'd worn for the ceremony. They weren't mine. They belonged to the Radcliffe family, passed down for 3 generations, the housekeeper had told me. I had smiled and thanked her then, hands trembling slightly. Now, I set them down gently on the vanity. I didn't want to break anything that didn't belong to me, which of course meant everything. I didn't go down for dinner. Instead, I made my way quietly into the small side kitchen I'd noticed on the house tour. It was separate from the Grand Chef's kitchen. This one felt more lived in. There were chipped teacups in the cabinet, and a dish towel embroidered with a faded M. I filled the kettle. There was something healing about ginger tea. My mother used to say it brought the body back into rhythm, especially when your heart's doing too much. I remembered how she'd make it on cold mornings, steeped with just a touch of honey and a slice of orange peel. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, her hand warm on mine, telling me stories about the women in our family who loved too quietly and worked too hard. My hands knew the routine. The tea was ready in minutes. I carried it back up to my room, with quiet footsteps, careful not to disturb the silence. When I opened the door, I froze. Ethan was standing by the window. He turned slowly, as if he hadn't expected to be caught. We both stood there, uncertain, caught in a moment neither of us had prepared for. "I thought you'd be downstairs," he said finally. "I wasn't hungry," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. "I needed something warmer than food." He looked at the cup in my hand. "Ginger?" I nodded. "My mother used to make it," I said, unsure why I was telling him. "It helps when things feel like too much." A pause. Then, something surprising. "I've heard that. It's good for circulation. And for grief." I didn't ask what he meant by that. There was a long silence before he stepped aside, allowing me to pass into the room. I walked to the table near the window and set the cup down. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said suddenly. I looked at him. He wasn't facing me. "I didn't mean to leave you alone after the ceremony. I assumed space would be better." I took a breath. "It's all right," I said, though it wasn't. "You don't owe me comfort." He turned toward me then, and something in his eyes, Tired, maybe. But not unkind. No, he said. But maybe I owe it to myself to stop assuming you need none. That sentence hung in the air like smoke. He left not long after. Didn't touch the tea. Didn't offer more words. But before he stepped out the door, he paused. I know about your mother, he said. My heart stopped. She was in the hospital when this arrangement began. Stage 4, I believe? I stared at him. I've been covering the bills, he added, almost reluctantly. Anonymous contributions, through a separate fund. You don't have to thank me. I didn't do it for gratitude. My lips parted, but no words came. He gave a small nod and stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him. I sat back down. The tea had cooled. I took a sip anyway. It was bitter, too strong. I had forgotten the honey. That night, I lay awake, eyes fixed on the shadow of the chandelier cast on the ceiling. I thought about how he'd stood in that same room, under the same ceiling, probably thinking this marriage was nothing more than duty. But now, I wasn't so sure. He had seen my mother, chosen to act, and never told me. Somehow that meant more than if he had walked in with flowers or knelt at my feet. It wasn't grand. It was quiet, like my father used to be. I remembered something else, from long ago. I was 7. It had been raining for days. Our shop was leaking, the roof groaning with every gust of wind. I'd cried because my drawing got soaked through. My father had said nothing, only brought me a clean piece of paper and sat beside me while I started over. He didn't fix the leak that day. He fixed the part of me that was sad. Maybe Ethan was that kind of man. The kind who didn't say the right things, but stayed in the room long enough to listen. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to this arrangement than duty. Maybe it was the beginning of something neither of us could name yet. The letter wouldn't leave my mind. It sat in the corner of my thoughts like an unopened door, whispering through the cracks. I had read it twice now. Once aloud, once in silence. Both times, it felt heavier. In the morning, I asked Mother about it. She was sitting near the window at the hospital, her head wrapped in a light scarf, her tea cooling by the bedside table. Her voice was thinner than usual, but her eyes still sharp. I didn't show her the letter. I didn't have to. Did you love him? I asked. She didn't look at me. Your father? Or the man I wrote to? Both. A pause. The kind that settles between people who know the truth and are still deciding whether to say it. I loved your father in a way most people forget exists, she said finally, with quiet things. Breakfast kept warm, buttons resewn, shoes cleaned before he noticed they were dirty. And the man you wrote to? That was a different kind of knowing, one that makes you lose sleep. She reached out, her hand, dry but familiar on mine. Anna, she said, your father didn't lose his job because he was careless. He lost it because he did the right thing, and the Radcliffes weren't ready to honor that. I leaned in. What did he do? Her eyes drifted past me, toward the glass where sunlight fell in strips. There was a boy, she said, maybe 9 years old, curious, restless. He wandered where he shouldn't have, climbed too high, somewhere out near the old vineyard behind the estate. She closed her eyes for a moment. He slipped. Fell. No one else saw. Your father did. I swallowed. She opened her eyes again. He carried that boy back, quietly, refused to lie when asked who was responsible for him being out there alone. And that was the end of his employment. Was the boy Ethan, she said. Like it was the answer I already knew, I left the hospital with a chill in my bones. Not from the cold, but from the silence I'd lived in for so long. This marriage, this house, this man. I had thought I was entering their world for the first time. But I had already been part of it. Or rather, it had already passed through us once and left a wound. When I arrived at the Radcliffe estate, it was near evening. The air smelled like burning wood from the fireplace. The kind of smell that clung to memory. I didn't expect Ethan to be home. He often worked late, locked in rooms I had never entered. But that night, I found him in the library. He was seated by the fire, reading, though the book was closed in his lap. His eyes weren't moving. He looked like someone trying to remember how to relax. I stood at the doorway longer than I should have. I spoke to my mother, I said finally. He looked up. She told me about the vineyard. He didn't move. She told me how you fell, how my father found you, how he lost everything afterward. Still, no words from him. Just a shift in posture, a tightening at the jaw. I didn't know, he said at last. Not until recently. And still, I whispered, you didn't tell me. His eyes met mine. They weren't cold this time. They weren't even guarded. Just worn. I didn't know how. The fire crackled between us. It sounded louder than it should have. You married me out of debt, I said. Not love, not even duty. Just guilt. No, he said. I married you because I thought it was the only thing I had left to make it right. I walked toward the window, needing space from the weight of his voice. The curtains were heavy velvet, drawn to the sides. The world outside was fading into dusk. I thought about my father's hands, rough from years of labor, and yet gentle when folding my socks or lifting me from sleep. I wondered how many mornings he stood in this house, polishing floors that had never once reflected his face. Guilt, I repeated, more to myself than to him. Doesn't build anything worth living in. Ethan stood. I turned. And for the first time since we met, he didn't look like the Radcliffe heir. He didn't look like a man bound in suits and inheritance. He looked tired, human. I've built towers out of guilt, he said. They hold, but they're hollow. You step into them and realize there's no warmth. I studied him. Then why did you bring me here? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer. Slowly. Deliberately. Because, he said softly, you reminded me what warmth looked like, and I was selfish enough to try to borrow it. We stood there, not touching, not speaking, just breathing the same air. And then his eyes held mine. Not in command, not in apology, but in something gentler. Something that made time slow again. I didn't say I forgave him, because forgiveness, I had learned, was not a moment. It was a process, a slow unraveling of knots we'd tied too tightly. But that look, the one he gave me that night, stayed. Long after he left the room, long after the fire dimmed, long after I returned to my own bed, curled beneath unfamiliar sheets, holding a letter I could no longer unread. The porch hadn't changed. The paint was still peeling where the sun hit hardest, and the swing by the window creaked with even the gentlest wind. The smell was the same too, earth, chamomile, and the faintest trace of oil from my father's old workbench, long since gone. When I opened the screen door, it moaned in protest. I hadn't oiled it since spring. Mother was asleep inside. Benji was at school. I came here to breathe, to escape the silent corridors of the Radcliffe estate that echoed more than they whispered. And then I saw his car, parked under the maple tree with its branches bowing like old hands. For a moment, I stood there, uncertain. He hadn't called, hadn't written. But he was here. Ethan Radcliffe, standing on the porch of our crooked little house like he belonged nowhere else. He turned when he heard the door, and I saw it in his face. That flicker of doubt, not arrogance, not distance, just a quiet question. Would I let him stay? I didn't speak. Instead, I walked past him and sat on the swing. It groaned as it always did, and I reached for the mug I'd left there earlier that morning, still half full of lukewarm tea. I wasn't sure you'd come here, I said finally. I wasn't sure I should. The wind rustled through the dried leaves above us. Fall was starting to settle in, slow and golden. My mother's asleep, I said, not looking at him. She tires easily now. I didn't come to disturb her. I nodded. Then, after a pause, then why did you come? Ethan sat on the other end of the swing, careful to keep space between us. There are places, he said slowly, that feel more honest than others. This is one of them. I smiled, faintly. Honesty wasn't part of our arrangement. No, he said, his voice low. But maybe it should have been. We sat like that for a while, not saying much. The porch creaked under our weight. A neighbor's dog barked, somewhere in the distance. The wind carried the scent of someone baking down the street. Cinnamon and butter and something warm. Ethan pulled something from the pocket of his coat. A small square of fabric, carefully folded. He set it on the table between us. I looked down. It was the handkerchief I had embroidered when I was 15. A.L., stitched in tiny red thread, surrounded by a circle of imperfect daisies. I had lost it years ago. I found it in the house, he said, tucked between the pages of a book in the library. I thought it was beautiful. I didn't know it was yours until I saw the initials. My fingers hovered above it. It was a gift, I whispered. For my father. I never knew what happened to it. He nodded. I think he left it there. Maybe on purpose. Maybe not. I picked it up, feeling the worn softness between my fingers. The thread had faded, but the stitches were still strong. Thank you, I said, meaning more than just the object. He looked at me then, and his eyes weren't sharp or assessing. They were waiting. I'm not good at words, he said. I was raised to negotiate, not to feel. I know. But I want to be here, he added. Not just now. Not just because I feel guilty. Because when I think of a place that might feel like home, I think of this. The silence was different now. Softer. More alive. My mother used to say that some silences aren't empty. They're full, just waiting to be listened to. I stood up and went inside. When I returned a few minutes later, I held 2 mugs of ginger, tea, steam curling like small ghosts above them. Ethan took his with both hands. It smells like your house, he said. It is my house, I replied, and smiled. We sat again. The wood creaked. The tea warmed my palms. I don't know what this is, I said after a long pause. But I know it's the first time I've felt seen in weeks. He didn't respond right away. Just sipped his tea. Then he said quietly, that might be the first time I've felt trusted in years. Before he left, he placed the mug back on the table, turned it so the handle faced me. I'll be at the house, he said. Not the office? He shook his head. No, not tonight. And then he hesitated. Just for a second. Not enough to make it dramatic, but enough for me to notice. He reached out, not to touch my hand, but to adjust the hem of my coat where it had slipped. A gesture so small it could have been mistaken for habit. But it wasn't habit. It was care. I watched him walk back to the car. Watched him open the door. And before he stepped in, he looked back. Not to ask for anything. Not even to say goodbye. Just to see if I was still watching. And I was. Some endings don't come with shouting. Some doors close so softly, you don't hear them until you realize you're standing alone in the silence they leave behind. It wasn't a fight. There were no angry words, no slammed cups, no broken dishes, just a voice I shouldn't have heard, drifting down the hallway, quiet but clear through a half-open door. "This arrangement was never meant to last," Ethan said. "I just need to make sure she's taken care of after it ends." I stopped. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. There was another voice, his lawyer maybe, muffled and far away. I didn't catch the words. Only Ethan's next sentence. "She's not like the others. She doesn't expect anything. That's what makes this harder." I didn't hear the rest. I turned and walked away, careful to let my heels fall silently on the marble. Like a guest in someone else's house. Like someone who had overstayed her welcome. Back at the old house, the porch welcomed me with a sigh. The swing still creaked, the window still stuck when I tried to open it. And somehow, it felt more like home than anywhere else in the world. I didn't cry. I brewed a pot of tea, the kind Mother liked with orange peel and cloves. I swept the kitchen, floor. I lit a candle. I folded laundry that wasn't mine. I waited. I thought he might come after me. He didn't. The next morning, I sat by the window, mug in hand, watching the sun crawl slowly across the chipped paint on the porch rail. That's when I saw it. A small, paper bag, neatly folded, sitting just outside the screen door. No knock, no note. Inside was a spool of thread. It was the kind I hadn't seen in years, a particular shade of plum my father used to buy me when I was little, because it reminded him of my mother's scarves. It wasn't from a Radcliffe store. It was from a local shop I used to frequent. I hadn't mentioned it in years. I turned the spool in my hand. On the underside was a short message, handwritten in small, careful letters. "Some things are hard to say, but I still hope you hear them." I didn't smile, but something inside me cracked open, just a little. That night, after Mother had gone to sleep, I sat in her room and sorted through her box of old letters. She kept everything: receipts from the shop, thank you notes from neighbors, scraps of fabric with dates written in ink. And then I found it. A letter she never sent, addressed to Eleanor Radcliffe, Ethan's grandmother. I unfolded it carefully, the paper thin and trembling in my hands. I don't regret loving someone decent. I only regret that decency wasn't enough to protect him from the system that raised your family. We were never meant to belong in the same rooms. But still, somehow our stories keep crossing. If one day your grandson grows up to forget what kindness looks like, I hope he finds someone to remind him, not with anger, but with quiet. That's how real love begins. With quiet. I didn't finish the letter. I folded it and placed it gently back into the envelope. Then I reached for a pen. I didn't write a reply to Ethan. Not right away. Instead, I wrote a letter to myself. It said, "You are not a placeholder. You are not the debt someone pays off. You are not the arrangement. You are the warmth he didn't know he missed. You are the choice he never knew he wanted to make." And then I went to sleep. The next day, I returned to the estate. Not because he asked, but because I needed to see. I needed to know if the words he couldn't say had left a light on. When I walked through the front door, there were no servants. No flickering chandeliers. No grand gestures. Just a mug on the kitchen table. Steam still rising. My favorite tea. The kind only I ever brewed. Beside it sat the thread spool, unwound, waiting. Ethan appeared at the doorframe. He didn't look surprised to see me. He didn't speak. He only lifted one hand in greeting, not as command, not as apology, just a gesture that meant, "I see you." I stepped forward. We didn't hug. We didn't fall into each other's arms. We sat. Across the table. 2 cups. 2 people. 2 silences finally becoming 1. And in that quiet, something changed. Not everything, but something. It had been 2 weeks since the thread and the tea, since the silence between us softened into something like understanding. Ethan hadn't said much in words, but something about the way he started showing up, quietly, consistently, said everything I'd needed to hear. He didn't explain himself. He just started sitting at the kitchen table in the mornings, reading while I brewed tea, nodding when I placed a mug near his hand. He didn't try to hold mine, but he never moved away. That morning, the air in Boston had turned colder. October was wrapping its fingers around the edges of the city, tugging leaves from the trees and sending a hush into the streets. I was folding laundry in the back room when Ethan asked if I could take a short drive with him. He didn't say where, just that he'd like to show me something. Not grand, not important, just something. The way he said it, eyes steady but unsure, told me it was more than he could admit. We drove in silence, past the river, past a part of town I hadn't seen in years. The buildings changed, grew smaller, warmer. No glass towers, no marble steps, just quiet sidewalks, children riding bikes, a bakery with its windows fogged from the inside. Then we stopped in front of a red brick building with ivy beginning to climb its corners. It wasn't new, but it was clean. Fresh paint, wide windows, a bench on the front lawn beneath a turning maple tree. Above the doorway was a sign carved into the wood. The Margaret House. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Ethan stood beside me, hands in the pockets of his coat. "It's a community health center," he said softly. "Pediatric care, end-of-life care, services for low-income families. There's a sewing room, too, for therapy or just something to do with your hands when the world's too loud." I turned to look at him. "You named it after her." He nodded. "She kept coming up in conversations with the architects. They asked who it was for, and I kept saying, someone who never asked for anything, but gave everything." There was a tightness in my chest I didn't know how to loosen. I thought of my mother, her quiet dignity, the way she used to hum as she ironed our clothes, as if smoothing wrinkles could keep the world intact. "She doesn't know yet," I said quietly. "You can tell her when you're ready," Ethan replied. "Or not. It's yours now, too." We stood in silence. He didn't reach for me, but I felt something shift between us, like a window slowly opened after years of stale air. As we walked toward the door, he hesitated again. "There's more." Inside, the place smelled of paint and clean linen. The floors gleamed softly under the overhead lights. Along one hallway, photos lined the wall. Children smiling, volunteers handing out books, nurses leaning gently over chairs. Ethan led me to a small office at the end. It wasn't finished. No desk yet, no curtains. But there was a stack of documents on the shelf. And a letter. "I stepped down," he said, not looking at me. "From the board. From the company." I turned sharply. He went on calmly, as if rehearsed. "I gave the CEO role to someone who's wanted it for years. I kept a small stake, but the rest goes here, to the center, and to programs like it." "Why?" I whispered. He finally looked at me. "Because power never made me a better man. It made me efficient. It made me rich. But it never made me feel proud. Not like this." I took a step closer, not thinking, just moved by the honesty in his voice. "And what now?" I asked. "You gave everything away." He smiled, a small, worn, peaceful smile. "Not everything. Just the parts that didn't belong to me." We didn't speak for a while. There was too much in the air to name, but I walked over to the window, placed my hand on the sill. And I thought of something my mother had once said, long before the hospital days, when we still had our old kitchen and our tiny shop. "People don't need to love you loudly," she'd said, pouring tea into chipped cups. They just need to show up, again and again, until you forget to doubt them. I turned back to Ethan. You showed up, I said. He gave a small nod. I'll keep showing up. That evening, he drove me home. We didn't hold hands in the car. The radio played faint jazz, and the sky outside went from gold to gray. When he pulled up to the curb, I stayed seated for a moment. You could have told me all this, I said. But you didn't. He replied gently. Some things you don't say. Some things you build. I opened the door, stepping out onto the walk, then paused, leaned back in slightly. And what do you build for someone you love? He met my eyes. A door they can always walk through, even if they've left. I didn't answer, but I didn't close the door either. The weather had turned. Not cold, not yet, but softer somehow. The air carried that strange stillness that always arrived just before the leaves began to fall. The kind of quiet that didn't ask for attention, but somehow held it anyway. Ethan came by that afternoon with no announcement, no excuse. Just a knock on the back door and a loaf of bread still warm from a local bakery. I met him in the kitchen, flour on my apron, my hands sticky with dough. He smiled when he saw the mess. Not a wide smile, he never did things that way, but the kind that softened his entire face. And then, wordlessly, he rolled up his sleeves. We kneaded the dough together at the old wooden table, side by side, not saying much, not needing to. His movements were clumsy at first. He pressed too hard, then not enough. But he watched the way I folded, the rhythm of it, and slowly, his hands found the pace. When the dough was set aside to rise, we sat on the porch with mugs of tea, the same way we had weeks ago. The swing creaked, the wind teased the corners of my hair, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan said, almost as if to the trees, I used to think love had to sound a certain way, loud, clear, announced. I turned toward him, surprised. He was still watching the street. But it doesn't, does it? He continued. Sometimes it's just knowing the exact way someone stirs their tea, or remembering the thread color they used when they were 15. My heart pulled gently inside my chest. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He looked at me then, eyes steady, vulnerable in a way that felt like a whispered promise. I'm not here because I owe you anything, he said. I'm here because I found peace in your silence, and I've been chasing that kind of quiet my whole life. I set down my mug. There was nothing grand about what I did next. I didn't throw my arms around him or cry or confess anything cinematic. I simply reached out, across the inches of space between us, and rested my hand on his. His fingers curled slightly, just enough to hold mine. We sat like that, hand to hand, swinging gently as the light shifted and fell across our knees. Later, as dusk draped the sky in soft amber, Ethan walked with me into the garden. The flowers were tired now, blooms curling inward, stems growing brittle, but it didn't matter. The scent of soil and lavender lingered like memory. I picked a few sprigs of rosemary for dinner. He didn't ask what it was for. He just held out his palm to take what I didn't need. That night, we didn't return to the estate. He stayed. He slept on the couch, blanket over his chest, one foot peeking out like a child who refused to be tucked in completely. I watched him for a moment from the hallway. He looked peaceful. Not smaller, but somehow softer. Like a man who had finally stopped carrying armor into every room. I left the hallway light on. In the morning, I found him already in the kitchen. The tea was steeped just right. Ginger and orange peel, no sugar, just the way I liked it. He didn't say anything when I entered. He just pulled out the chair across from him and waited. The newspaper lay between us, untouched. My cup was warm when I picked it up, the steam curling into the space between us like a secret only we shared. I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, I've stopped wondering if this is temporary. His expression didn't change much, but his hand tightened ever so slightly around the handle of his mug. I'm still learning, he said. I know. But if there's one thing I know with certainty, he continued, it's that I want to keep learning near you. I placed my cup down. I don't need perfect, I said. I never did. I just need presence. He nodded. That I can give. There was a silence after that. Not empty, but whole. Like a room finally furnished with something real. By midday, we were in the sewing room together. He didn't sew, of course, but he sat near the window, watching as I showed a neighborhood girl how to thread her first needle. His posture was relaxed, his eyes soft. I caught him watching me more than once, not in admiration, but in awe, like he couldn't quite believe this was his life now, and didn't want to speak too loudly in case it disappeared. When the girl left with her crooked little patchwork square, Ethan stood and walked toward the shelf. I found something you might like, he said, pulling a book from the second row. It was my mother's old pattern book. She'd written notes in the margins, comments, recipes, even reminders to herself in cursive that looked like ivy vines. I thought we'd lost this, I said, holding it close. I found it in the attic, he replied. Wrapped in a scarf. Which scarf? He smiled. The plum one. That night, before the lamps were lit, we stood outside under the first real chill of the season. He didn't speak. Neither did I. But our hands found each other again. This time with certainty. And we stood under the turning sky like two people who finally understood that love doesn't always arrive with a declaration. Sometimes it just walks in, sits down, and never leaves. The sun filtered gently through the lace, curtains casting patterns across the wooden floor like ripples in a quiet pond. Outside, the air was crisp with early November, the trees nearly bare now, save for a few stubborn leaves that clung to the branches like memories refusing to fall. I stood in the kitchen, watching Ethan pour coffee. It had been 6 months since. The center opened its doors. Since the name Margaret House was carved into that wooden sign. Since Ethan chose a quieter life, not because he had to, but because he finally understood what it meant to belong. We didn't speak in grand declarations. We still didn't say I love you every morning, or sign our names with hearts. But he made the bed each day before I could. He folded the towels the way I liked. He showed up to every doctor's appointment with my mother, even the ones I said he didn't need to attend. That was the kind of love I'd learned to trust. Benji came home from school carrying a shoebox full of sewing scraps. He was learning how to make fabric bookmarks. He said the girls in his class liked them, and that was reason enough. Teach me how to edge it properly? He asked, holding one up like a treasure. I nodded, taking a seat beside him at the sewing table. Ethan leaned in the doorway, watching us with the kind of quiet smile that had become his trademark. It still surprised me sometimes, how someone so rooted in power had come to love the smallest things. Later, as I tidied the room, I reached for an old wooden sewing box I hadn't opened in years. The hinges creaked as I lifted the lid. Inside were buttons, ribbons, a measuring tape faded with age, and a letter, folded neatly, yellowed around the edges, addressed simply, "For when you're ready." My mother's handwriting. I sat on the floor and opened it slowly, the way one opens a gift not knowing what it contains, only that it was saved for a reason. Anna, if you're reading this, it means life has carried you farther than you thought. It would. And I hope you're not reading this in sorrow. But in peace, I always believed in love, even when I didn't say it. I loved your father for his hands, for his steadiness. I loved you for your questions. And if you've found someone who makes you feel at home in your own skin, then you've done better than most. Love isn't loud, sweetheart. It's the sound of someone making tea without being asked. It's a coat hung on your side of the door. It's staying through silence. And if he stays, if you stay, then you're doing it right. Let your heart be soft. Let it remember. Mommy didn't cry. Not in the loud way. But something inside me grew full. So full it couldn't hold everything anymore. A warmth that spread from my chest to my fingertips, like I had been holding my breath for years, and finally exhaled. When I looked up, Ethan had stepped into the room. He saw the letter, said nothing, just knelt beside me. I handed it to him. He read it slowly, the way he read everything now. With care. When he finished, he folded it back and placed it gently into the box. Then he placed his hand over mine, and I felt the quiet rhythm of his breath, steady and present. "Thank you," he whispered, "for choosing to stay." I looked at him, truly looked, and answered, "You made it easy." That evening, the three of us, Ethan, Benji, and I, cooked dinner together. Benji peeled potatoes while Ethan overseasoned the roast. I teased him gently, and he grinned like a boy caught red-handed. Later, after the dishes were done and the house grew still, I sat in the sewing room alone. The air was faintly perfumed with lavender sachets I'd tucked into the corners months ago. I took out a fresh piece of paper and began to write. To the child I may one day hold, if you're anything like us, you'll carry silence in your bones. You'll trust actions more than words. You'll learn that love isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just a chair pulled out before you sit down. Your father is not perfect, but he is steady. He is still learning how to love gently, but he has built you a world from his bare hands and second chances. And me? I'll teach you how to sew, how to listen, how to sit with someone when they can't speak. Because that's where love lives, in the spaces between what's said. I hope this letter finds you in peace. I hope it feels like a hand on your back, reminding you that you are never alone. Mom, I placed the letter in the same wooden box, beside my mother's. 2 letters, 2 generations, 2 kinds of love, both quiet, both lasting. As I turned off the more lights and walked toward the bedroom, I passed Ethan sitting in the living room, book in hand, glasses slipping down his nose. He looked up and smiled. "Coming to bed?" "Yes," I said, walking over to him, brushing a hand gently along his shoulder. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." He stood, took my hand, and together we climbed the stairs. 1 step, 1 breath, 1 shared future at a time. If this story touched something quiet in you, if you believe in love that arrives softly but stays, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. There are more stories waiting, told in the same slow, steady rhythm